Great to be back, home and to be back worshiping with you. I got to admit, it was kind of fun at the Wild Goose Festival to be worshiping with Matt Mayer leading worship. That was pretty cool. But there's nothing like being back home and being part of this growing, we'll call it a family, but and maybe it is a family in the best and the worst of it, but it is what God is doing among us, and so glad that we're together again. And while I was gone, the distressing news came over and about the shooting in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the shooting in Falcon Heights, Minnesota. And then my heart just fell to the floor when I heard about what happened in Dallas. Now, where I was at is in the hills of North Carolina, and there's very little internet. So they would tell us about these events, and we would pray about them, but my heart just sank. And I found myself after processing some of this, and I'm still doing it, and I think we all are asking that question, what can I do about this? I must do something about this. And because I'm so radically aware now that we live in a world that at least our culture has allowed itself or decided to allow itself to be set up into camps. There's the Republican camp and the Democratic camp and the real Christian camp and the nominal Christian camp, and the camps I'm talking about, the walls and the positions and the opinions and the places we stake out, and then we use relationships and social media in order to reinforce the territory that we have marked out. And it's no wonder that it's kind of hard to see the pain and the latent discrimination that so many of our African American brothers and sisters experience when we can't see past our camp. I found it interesting to hear Senator Tim Scott, Republican Senator of South Carolina, an African American, speak about this year 6 or 7 times he's been pulled over, presumably, as they say, driving while black. I don't know that experience, and I never had the talk with my kids. But as long as we stay in these camps, it's no wonder we don't see the kind of stress and heavy burdens and the immense demands that have now been placed on our law enforcement brothers and sisters. And all we are so much more aware of is, if you're tuned in to media and social media, is people have marked out their positions. And I find myself in the middle of this and the grief I feel over the last 2 weeks. And what's happening, Lord, what can I do? And I remind myself, and I hope us too, that we are followers of Jesus at whatever level we understand that relationship. And we hope and pray we're growing in that relationship. That we find in the life and ministry of Jesus a way to life. And so ultimately, the answer to that question as a follower of Jesus for me is, I am called to do what Jesus did. To follow the way of Jesus. And I see in Zacchaeus' interaction with Jesus and Jesus' encounter with Zacchaeus that a way for us to embrace and to walk in this difficult place we find ourselves. Because something happened to Zacchaeus in this encounter with Jesus. Jesus moved towards Zacchaeus. Jesus honored Jesus. Zacchaeus actually called him by name, and Jesus said, I want to eat at your house tonight. Jesus built a relationship with Zacchaeus. And something about this encounter, this relationship, this experience, it radically changed Zacchaeus. So let's unpack the story a little bit if we can. And ask this question of us. What do we know about Zacchaeus? What do we know?
He's little.
He was little. He was a little man. Some other verses say he was short. All right, what else do we know about Zacchaeus? He was what? He was not just a tax collector, that's true. He was the chief tax collector. And that matters because tax collectors were not well liked. Typically what would happen is, and he probably oversaw more than one tax collection station. They would set up tax collection booths, and sometimes it was designated places, sometimes they would move them, and whenever someone passed through, they had to pay a tax. And what would happen is the tax collectors and the chief tax collector had an arrangement with the Roman government. They were required to collect so much taxes And by the way, anything above that, they the Romans looked the other way. So it was a system that was ripe for injustice and abuse and at least financial, if not actual physical oppression of the people. So Zacchaeus was really liked, wasn't he? Yeah. And besides that, he interacted with the Romans who were pagans and dirty and unclean. And the last thing that we know about Zacchaeus is that he's what? He's a tree climber, that's right. That wasn't what I was thinking, but that's a good point. He knew how to climb trees. He was rich. And at one point Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go to the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Of course, Jesus didn't continue to say, but what is possible with man, what is impossible with humankind is possible with God. So there's always that possibility. And we see Zacchaeus responding to that invitation. But here's the reality. He was short. He was a chief tax collector. He was rich. And there's one fourth thing we see in the text that he was considered unclean. And definitely unlikable. 4 labels already laid on Zacchaeus. Short. I don't know if any of you ever grew up short. I had short friends. And every once in a while they would remind me how tough it is sometimes. He was rich and he was a tax collector and he was unclean. That's how he was known. That's how he was treated. We know nothing else about his life. Just the labels. And based on those labels, Jesus would have had every right to walk the other way. To turn his back on Zacchaeus because there was something unclean and unbroken about the camp that Zacchaeus came from. But that's not what Jesus does. Instead, Jesus moves towards Zacchaeus, calls his name out of the tree. He honored something more in Zacchaeus than anybody else in that community was willing to do. He saw in Zacchaeus' life more of a story than a label. He saw Zacchaeus with the eyes of God and not with human eyes. When was the last time you looked at someone in another camp or race or part of the community or across the tracks or whatever designations we give for people different than us and saw them for the image of God inside of them first? Then those other labels we so easily use. Bob Farr, who's the director of Congregational Excellence in the Missouri Annual Conference, says that we now live in a day and age where people don't respond to typical evangelism efforts, that we are really more sophisticated and far more skeptical, and people don't like the impression that evangelism efforts seem more about numbers than they do about people and lives and stories. And he proposes that we need to now have a different way of inviting the world to experience Christ, to be change agents for God. He says that we need to change the E word, which is evangelism, to the R word, which is relationship building. If we want people to begin to understand and experience what a difference a relationship with God makes in our lives. And he says there are 4 steps, and that maybe we can take with us as we think about for helping us move in that direction of establishing relationships rather than labels. He says, number 1, get a name. Names matter. Imagine what Zacchaeus felt like when Jesus, this rabbi, this superhero, as the kids are learning, calls out his name. Imagine how that felt like. Get their name. Start a conversation. Take an interest in the other person. Build a relationship. And that means being interested over an extended period of time in their story. Being far more interested in the story of the other person than you are in being able to and wanting to tell your own story. And then he says, as that relationship grows and develops, he says, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a year, it could be 10 years. We don't know how people will respond to the building of a relationship. That's really not our place. That's God's place, to be honest with you. But he says, at some point, be ready for the why question. Why are you doing this for me, with me? Why do you like God? Or why do you live like you do? Or what difference does God make in your life? At some point, he says, that question will be asked in a lot of different ways, but it'll be an opportunity for us to maybe tell our story, which, by the way, is a whole other sermon, learning how to tell our story. Because he points out that in every workshop he's been in, and he's taught this process, he says, when he asks people to tell his story, you know the first thing they talk about? Guess. No guesses? Okay. The first thing they talk about is, well, I serve in the trustees in my congregation. And I serve on the administrative board, and I sing in the choir. That they tend to talk about their church relationship instead of their relationship to God. And what he wants us to be mindful of is we need to tell our story, because we all have one. We all have one. It's interesting. He talks about how some of us are introverted, and some of us are extroverted. So the introverts, we have a hard time telling our story. And the extroverts, we're ready to get right out there and just tell everybody and see what happens. But he says, if you're an introvert, this is what he says. It's really kind of funny. He says, you probably need to drink about 4 cans of Red Bull and then go out and meet people. Never tried that, but maybe that's because he says we need to overcome some of that inertia. That's a whole other story. But the point of this is something happens when we take an authentic interest in moving beyond labels and stigmas and camps and choose to see the other as a child of God first, to be willing to engage and understand and hear their story. I found it interesting this week. Evelyn and I were driving up from North Carolina on Tuesday when they were broadcasting the memorial service in Dallas for the 5 slain law enforcement officers, and listening to great speakers. Great, it was beautiful, the things people said. But the thing that President Bush and President Obama said really stuck with both of us and found to be both inspiring and challenging and touching. But something President Bush said stayed with me. And I want to read it to you. He says, he said in that service, at times it seems like the forces pulling us apart are stronger than the forces binding us together. Argument turns too easily into animosity. Disagreement escalates too quickly into dehumanization. Too often we judge other groups by their worst examples while judging ourselves by our best intentions. Boy, isn't that true? And then he begins to point away. He says, at our best, we practice empathy, imagining ourselves in the lives and circumstances of others. This is the bridge across our nation's deepest divisions. And it's not merely a matter of tolerance, but of learning from the struggles and stories of our fellow citizens and finding our better selves in the process. And he said this, he said, at our best, we honor the image of God in one another. That's a Christ-like speaking there. That's a hard call. And as I ask the questions in a world of camps and staked out positions and Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, what do I do? And I see the story of Jesus and Zacchaeus reminding me I should do what Jesus did. Let that be our first choice. To move out of our camp and be willing to listen and remind me the process. Be willing to listen and first get a name, start express interest. Hey, tell me about this. Build a relationship. And at some point you may get and then he adds, well, we're not going there today. He says, and then invite them to church. But be careful about inviting them to church because then they have a terrible view of church. But invite them to worship God. But he says when you do that, either go pick them up or tell them you'll meet them and you'll sit by them. Because for folks that don't know church and are curious about God, this can be an intimidating place. I got off the beaten track. The truth is, it's a hard choice to look for the image of God in the other person. It's a sacrificial choice. It's a cross-shaped choice. It's about choosing to not be transactional, what I put into it so I get something out of it, and instead choosing to be relational. One of the things I think that the church of Jesus Christ, the followers of Jesus, can offer is a strong sense of moral values that lie at the heart of what shapes our community. 10 Commandments are perfect examples, but we have things like honesty and a willingness to work and willing to use our resources, not only to care for the ones we love, but for others. But one thing I hear people say is we have lost our sense of values. And the reality is, in the world in which we live, values are caught with people more than they are taught to people. Don't you know that's true? They want to know how it works in your life before they're going to try it in their life. It's one thing for us to stand up there and tell them how they should live. It's another thing for us to walk beside them and let them see in our lives the power of these values that give us life. That's why I'm looking forward to this week. Maddie says I'm being assigned to one of the groups as one of the guides. And I'm looking forward to sitting around the table and eating, doing crafts, and talking to children and getting their name and starting a conversation with them and learning a little bit more about their story. And I don't know if it's going to lead to why, because that's really God's thing, But to engage in a relationship that may at some point in time I can never see because it's a God thing, seeing what happens. Maybe through their parents, maybe in a conversation with their parents. So I hope you'll come, and if you've got nothing to do, then get a name, start a conversation, build a relationship, and trust the rest of God. Which brings us to the last two things, a question and a challenge I want to leave with us today. The question is for us to be aware of is when we think about engaging in relationships and making time and margin in our lives to build relationships with friends and acquaintances, the question is, we don't always know whether that relationship is going to bear the fruit. And so the question is, can we trust God that in our interactions, our connections, our conversations, that God is taking us somewhere? That God will be moving in them. And allow God to do God's thing while we're being used by God for His great purpose. And the last to remember is this. Sometimes, you engage in those relationships and they don't always go where you want to go. They don't always bear fruit. They bear no fruit at all. They may just look like they're dead on the vine. But never lose this. Go ahead, Patrick. No matter what happens, every opportunity is an opportunity to bless someone. Whether you're at the grocery store, or you had your car worked on, or like I did at Mimi's the other day, or some other restaurant, or you're working on someone's house this week, or there's always an opportunity to encourage someone, to bless someone, to tell something you really appreciate about them, to let them know that they have a name like Jesus. I found myself asking, what should I do? And then I saw in Jesus' example a way to move past our camps, to build a relationship, to be more interested in the story of someone else before I tell my own story, to share their name, to build a relationship, and then allow God to do what God does best. All God's people said.